Welcome to Infidelity Files. My heart pounded with excitement as I dragged my suitcase through the familiar streets of my hometown. I hadn't told Mom and Dad I was coming home for the summer, and I couldn't wait to surprise them. I pictured their shocked faces and warm hugs as I opened the front door. But the house was quiet. No one was home. A wave of disappointment washed over me, but then I heard a familiar voice. Kate. It was Joe, my little brother, all grown up. He was taller than me now, with a broad smile that lit up his face. We hugged, and it felt so natural, so easy. After a long, exhausting journey from university, I was ready to unwind. I headed straight to the shower, letting the hot water wash away the grime and stress of the semester. As the warm water cascaded over me, I finally started to relax. Once I was clean and refreshed, I slipped into a comfy summer dress and padded barefoot to my room. It felt like stepping back in time. My old posters were still on the wall, and my bed was made with my favorite sheets. It was as if I'd never left. But as I settled into my bed, a thought occurred to me. I'd been so focused on school and work that I'd neglected my personal life. I missed the intimacy and connection I used to have. Sure, I'd been on a few dates, but nothing serious. It was hard to find time for romance in a crowded dorm room. I realized that I needed to reconnect with myself, to tune in to my own needs and desires. As I lay there, lost in thought, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held. I traced the lines of my body, a mindless gesture, a way to ground myself, the soft fabric of my dress, the cool touch of my skin. It was a simple pleasure, a moment of peace. After days of stress and deadlines, I was finally allowing myself to relax. A knock at the door startled me. My heart pounded as I scrambled to answer it. Kate, Joe's voice called out. I smoothed my dress and opened the door. Something was off. Joe, usually so carefree, looked troubled. He hesitated in the doorway, then stepped inside. He sat on the edge of my bed, running a hand through his hair. I waited patiently, giving him space to speak. Finally, he started to talk, his voice hesitant at first. He told me about his girlfriend, a girl I'd heard him mention before. I'd always pictured them as the perfect young couple, happy and carefree. But things weren't as idyllic as they seemed. He described the constant arguments, the little things that turned into big problems. He felt like he could never do enough to make her happy. The relationship, once a source of joy, had become a burden. As he spoke, I couldn't help but notice how much he'd changed. He wasn't the same boy I used to babysit. He had a quiet maturity, a depth of feeling I hadn't seen before. His physical transformation was striking too. He was taller, broader shouldered, and carried himself with a newfound confidence. As he spoke, I found myself drawn to him in a way I hadn't expected. There was something about the vulnerability in his eyes, a raw honesty that was captivating. It was as if he'd peeled back layers, revealing a side of himself I'd never seen before. Without thinking, I reached out and pulled him into a hug. It was a simple gesture, a silent way of saying I understood. As we held each other, a strange energy filled the room. The air was thick with tension, a mix of comfort and something more. My hand instinctively moved to his hair, stroking it gently. His scent, a familiar blend of cologne and sweat, filled my senses. I traced the line of his jaw, the curve of his neck, lost in the moment. Our hands intertwined, a spark igniting between us. His touch was hesitant at first, but as he grew bolder, so did I. A wave of heat washed over me, a sensation I hadn't felt in a long time. We were on the brink of something, a dangerous, exciting something. But just as the tension reached its peak, the sound of the front door shattered the moment. I pulled away, my heart pounding, my cheeks flushed. The silence that followed was awkward, heavy with unspoken words. Joe and I exchanged a glance, a silent apology for what could have been. My parents' excited voices pulled me from my thoughts. Their warm hugs and endless questions were a welcome distraction, but my mind kept wandering back to the moment with Joe. The intensity of his touch, the electric charge between us, it was all too much to ignore. The rest of the evening was a blur. I laughed and talked with my family, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, every detail etched into my memory. The way he looked at me, the way he hesitated before touching me, it was all so vivid. That night, sleep was elusive. My mind raced, caught in a loop of what-ifs and maybes. I wondered if he was thinking about it too, if he felt the same connection. The next day was even more awkward. Every glance, every interaction was charged with unspoken tension. I couldn't help but notice the way he moved, the way he looked. Every little detail seemed significant, every moment ripe with possibility. I tried to distract myself, but my thoughts kept returning to that moment. I imagined different scenarios, different outcomes. What if the door hadn't opened? What if we hadn't stopped? The endless possibilities only fueled my anxiety. Later that evening, my dad joined me in the living room. He sat down beside me, a thoughtful expression on his face. The house felt strangely quiet after my parents left. The silence was deafening, amplifying every little sound. I tried to distract myself, to focus on anything but the thoughts swirling in my head. But the memory of Joe's touch lingered, a persistent ache. A dangerous idea began to take root. I tried to resist, to talk myself out of it, but the pull was too strong. The anticipation, the thrill of the unknown, was too tempting. Late that night, I crept to Joe's room. He was asleep, his breathing steady and peaceful. A surge of courage washed over me as I slipped into bed beside him. His body warmth enveloped me, a comforting sensation. I reached out, tracing the lines of his arm. His eyes fluttered open, surprise etched on his face. Without hesitation, I took his hand and guided it to my leg. He hesitated for a moment, then surrendered to the moment. The night unfolded, a whirlwind of sensation and intimacy. It was raw, unfiltered, and intoxicating. There was a vulnerability in the silence, a shared secret that bound us closer. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Every touch, every glance, every breath was electric. We were lost in a world of our own, a silent language of desire. I leaned in, our lips meeting in a passionate kiss. The intensity of the moment was intoxicating. I pulled him back onto the couch, our bodies intertwined. As I moved over him, I felt a surge of power and control. Every touch, every movement was deliberate, every kiss a declaration of desire. His hands tightened on my waist, grounding him in the moment. I leaned in, my lips tracing the contours of his face. His eyes, half-lidded with passion, held a captivating intensity. Each kiss was a symphony of sensation, a dance of bodies and souls. The world faded away, leaving only the two of us. Time stood still as we explored the depths of our desire, each touch a revelation. The intimacy was raw, the connection undeniable. His body beneath mine was a symphony of sensation, a perfect response to my touch. I felt powerful, in control, yet vulnerable and exposed. Every muscle, every curve, every breath was a silent invitation. I wanted him desperately, and the thought of pushing our boundaries further was intoxicating. But reality intruded, a harsh reminder of the world outside our bubble. When I paused, my voice barely a whisper, to ask if he was protected, his face was a mix of confusion and realization. The sheepish smile, the nervous explanation, It was both endearing and frustrating. How could he, a seasoned boyfriend, be so unprepared? I couldn't let the moment fizzle out. I wanted him, and I was determined to have him, even if it wasn't in the way I'd originally envisioned. As I shifted, my body tracing the contours of his, I felt a surge of power. I would dictate the terms, set the pace. His uncertain hands, his hesitant breaths fueled my desire. This was my moment, and I intended to savor it. His body tensed beneath me, a silent plea for more. Every touch, every breath, every shift was a response to my movements. I reveled in the power I held, the ability to evoke such raw emotion. As I kissed him, I felt a surge of confidence. I was in control, and he was surrendering to my touch. His body was a canvas, and I was the artist, painting strokes of pleasure. Every move, every caress was deliberate, calculated to push him to the brink. I loved the way he responded, the way his body trembled with anticipation. It was intoxicating, addictive. As the intensity grew, he began to mirror my movements. His hands, once hesitant, now moved with purpose. His breathing deepened, his body arched in response to my touch. It was a dance, a silent conversation of desire. In that moment, time stood still. The world outside faded away, leaving only the two of us. The intensity, the vulnerability, the raw emotion, it was all too much to comprehend. I was lost in the moment, caught in the whirlwind of our passion. But as the afterglow settled, reality began to creep back in. The intensity of the moment gave way to a sense of uncertainty. The exhilaration was still there, but it was tempered by a growing unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed a line that might be difficult to undo. I glanced at him, still lost in the afterglow. His eyes were closed, his breath slow and steady. A sense of peace washed over him, a contentment that mirrored my own. Yet, beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. "You're not a virgin, right?" I asked, my voice casual, though my mind raced. He opened his eyes, a mix of confusion and curiosity flashing across his face. Then, without hesitation, he nodded. "No," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. A strange sense of disconnect washed over me. I'd expected something different, something more. It was as if a piece of the puzzle was missing, a piece that would make sense of the intensity of the moment. I turned and walked away, my mind reeling. The euphoria of the experience was still fresh, but a growing unease settled in my stomach. I'd crossed a line, a boundary I hadn't even known existed. The intensity of the connection, the raw passion, had consumed me. I'd surrendered to the moment, letting my body guide my actions. But now, in the cold light of day, doubt crept in. Was it right? Was it wrong? I didn't have the answers. I couldn't shake the image of his eyes, the way he'd responded to my touch, the way he'd surrendered to the moment. It was a unique experience, a connection unlike any other. Yet the intensity of it all left me questioning everything. I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. The guilt was gnawing at me, but a part of me was still buzzing with excitement. I wanted to relive the moment, to feel that intensity again. But as the adrenaline faded, a wave of doubt washed over me. I needed to process what had happened, to understand my feelings. Was it wrong? Was it right? I didn't know. The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. One part of me was exhilarated, the other part was plagued with guilt. I returned to the room, my mind racing. I knew that this night would change me, no matter what. The intensity of the experience, the raw emotion, had left an indelible mark. As I pondered the events of the night, a question arose. Is this right? I yearned for answers, for validation. I wasn't alone, was I? Someone out there must have felt this way too. With a mixture of hope and trepidation, I decided to share my experience, seeking guidance and understanding